The winter of 1944 clung to the Ardennes like a living thing, heavy and cruel, wrapping every tree, every road, every stone house in layers of snow and ice that seemed determined to smother the world. The cold wasn't just something you felt on your skin, it was alive. It crawled into your boots, slid down your collar, sat heavy in your lungs every time you breathed. Even now, huddled in the shallow scrape of a foxhole on the edge of a nameless Belgian village, I could feel it pressing against me like a second weight on my shoulders. The wind came in low sighs through the pine trees, carrying the smell of wood smoke from the village and something else beneath it, the metallic tang of old artillery shells buried in the snow, the faint sourness of mud churned up by too many boots. Behind me, the village crouched in silence, its narrow streets empty except for a few soldiers moving slow between buildings blackened by old shell fire. The houses were small, their windows shuttered tight, smoke trailing thin from a handful of chimneys where civilians still waited out the war, praying it would pass them by like a bad dream. I leaned on my rifle, breath fogging the air, eyes on the tree line across the open field. The pines stood black against the white snow, watching us the way we watched them. Sergeant Miller always said the woods had eyes. After 3 weeks here, I believed him. The sky above was the color of old tin, low and heavy, like it might fall on us any minute. The snow underfoot crunched sharp when you moved, loud in the kind of silence that makes men nervous. War has a way of making even quiet feel dangerous. The men beside me. To my left, Private Johnson sat hunched in his hole, gloved hands wrapped around a canteen that probably held more coffee than water by now. His helmet was pulled low, his breath coming slow clouds into the freezing air. Johnson was from Ohio, used to talk about the warm summers there, the sound of baseball games drifting across the fields at dusk. He hadn't said much about home lately. None of us had. On my right, O'Connor leaned back against the frozen wall of his foxhole, cigarette cupped in one hand like he was guarding a secret flame. He was from Brooklyn, could curse in 3 languages, and claimed he'd never been afraid of anything in his life. The way his eyes kept sliding toward the tree line told a different story. "Cold enough for you, kid?" O'Connor muttered around the cigarette, his breath curling white in the air. I nodded, flexing numb fingers inside my gloves. "Feels like the whole damn world froze," he snorted. "World's been frozen a long time, we just finally noticed." Sergeant Miller. Miller came down the line a little after noon, his breath steaming in the cold. Big man, shoulders like a barn door, voice that could cut through wind or artillery just the same. He carried himself like the army had carved him out of the same wood as its rifles, straight, hard, no wasted motion. The men listened when he spoke, partly because of the stripes on his sleeve, mostly because he looked like he'd survived things the rest of us hadn't seen yet. "Orders from battalion," he said, crouching beside my hole. His voice carried even though he kept it low. "We hold here. Division thinks the Krauts are pulling back. Might even be quiet for a while." O'Connor gave a dry laugh. "Yeah, I'll bet my boots on that." And Miller ignored him, eyes scanning the tree line like he expected it to move. "Keep your heads down. They're shifting units north. Means we hold this sector with what we've got." I wanted to ask him how long, but didn't. Men who'd been here longer said you never asked how long. The answer was always either not long or too long, and neither made you feel better. The weight of waiting. War was mostly waiting. People back home thought it was all charges across open fields, men shouting, flags waving, the air full of smoke and glory. Mostly, it was sitting in holes in the ground while your breath froze in your throat, wondering if the next artillery shell had your name on it, wondering if the guy next to you would still be there tomorrow. We waited for orders, for chow, for mail that sometimes came and sometimes didn't. We waited for the war to notice us the way a man waits for thunder after seeing lightning on the horizon. That afternoon, the horizon stayed gray and silent. letters from home. Mail came up with the supply trucks just before dusk. A handful of letters passed down the line, paper soft from too many pockets, ink smudged where snow had melted through. I read mine slow, the way you eat when you're not sure when you'll see food again. Mom wrote about the neighbor's barn roof collapsing under the snow, about my kid sister bringing home a stray dog, about how the town looked quiet this winter. She didn't mention the war. People back home wrote like they were afraid the words might bring the front lines closer if they said too much. I folded the letter small and tucked it inside my coat, close to where the cold couldn't reach it. Night falling. The sky went purple, then black, the kind of dark that comes fast in winter. Men moved slower after sunset, voices dropping low like the night might hear us if we spoke too loud. Somewhere in the trees a branch cracked under the weight of snow, sharp and sudden, and every rifle along the line came up fast before we realized it wasn't artillery. Johnson muttered a curse under his breath. Miller came down the line again, boots crunching slow. Stand to. Double the watch tonight. Don't like how quiet it's been. None of us liked it either. The first distant booms. It was near midnight when we heard the first one. Faint, far off, like thunder rolling somewhere deep beyond the hills. Another followed, closer this time. Artillery. Men shifted in their holes, eyes turned toward the sound none of us wanted to hear. Miller stood at the edge of the road, head tilted like a man listening to the weather. The third one was closer still. He spat into the snow. "They're not pulling back," he said flatly. "They're coming. The fourth boom didn't sound far at all. It came with a dry, ripping crack that made the snow jump, the kind of sound that turns a man's bones hollow before his mind catches up. "Stand to." Miller's voice rolled down the line. Helmets on, rifles up, eyes on that tree line. Wind slid through the pines, hissing softly like a whisper you couldn't quite hear. I could smell the smoke before I saw it. Old powder lifted by a new blast, a burnt metal taste at the back of the throat. Somewhere behind us, a door slammed someone in the village, late to brace a hinge, then silence again, too clean, too thin. The first shells walked in like a man testing a floorboard. A whistle, a long, breathless beat, then the earth kicked up 20 yards short of the road, snow and black dirt geysering into the air and raining down in cold needles. Another landed left closer, so close, the shockwave flattened my breath and rattled my teeth. Splinters rattled out of the fence behind me like a handful of nails tossed onto tin. "Down," O'Connor barked, even though we were already in the dirt. The barrage gathered itself. Whistles braided into one another fast, then faster until the ridge and the village behind us shook like a man with a fever. Glass burst from the schoolhouse windows in a glittering cough. A scarecrow in a frozen garden pitched face down like it had taken a bullet. The church bell didn't ring, the clapper had fallen out last week, but you could feel the tower hum like a struck bone. Between blasts I heard small human sounds. A man swearing in a whisper. Another man saying his child's name and stopping after the first syllable. Johnson's teeth clicked. He held his canteen against his chest like a prayer book. I kept my face in the snow and counted 1, 2, 3, like the numbers might put a fence around the chaos. After the 28th, I forgot how to count. Then, as sudden as a door slamming shut, the shells stopped. Sound didn't come back all at once. It unrolled. The soft patter of falling clods, a splintering board, a far dog barking, and then not. My own breath felt too loud in the muffled world. Shapes moved in the smoke. At first they were just thicker pieces of night, then helmets, then the flat glint of metal, where a handguard caught a smear of moonlight. They came low through the shallow drainage cut that crossed the field's smart route. Miller had warned us about it, and their white smocks were already gray with churned snow. "Krauts," O'Connor murmured. And there was no bravado in it, just fact. "Steady," Miller said, voice level as a carpenter's bubble. "Hold. Hold. One man in the line raised his rifle too soon. Miller's hand came down on the barrel, firm and quiet. We watched the first file step over the black edge of a shell hole, 2, 5, 8 of them, now a dozen in a ragged crescent. Now, the ridge cracked open. Our first volley struck the dark like a match to oiled paper. A single blaze, then separate tongues of fire licking after targets. My own shot broke clean. The recoil was a hard, domestic thing, something known inside a night that wasn't. A figure pitched forward into the snow with a surprised sound, like a man who has just remembered he left something on the stove. Their machine gun answered from the left. Tracers grazed the slope in skipping red stitches. Bark fanned off a pine above my head in bright wooden dust. Johnson fired too fast, jammed, swore a thin Ohio farm boy curse, and worked the bolt with hands that didn't seem to belong to him. O'Connor's rhythm stayed slow, ugly, precise. He shot like a man tapping nails into a coffin lid. "Left! Tree cluster!" someone yelled. The .30 cal down the road coughed a long, punishing sentence into that thicket. When it stopped, the thicket didn't move anymore. Mortars bloomed again, single rounds this time, fat and mean. One plumped into the road behind us and flung a wagon wheel into the air, like a child's toy. Another stung the fence a foxhole over. When the smoke peeled away, the fence was gone, and so was the boy behind it. I don't remember changing clips. My hands did it while my brain stood at the tree line, too busy trying to see the future. A German broke the wire by our center with a set of pliers and a curse. I threw a grenade without thinking. It arced low and rolled into his legs like a lost ball finding home. The thud was small and personal. The snow lifted in a sigh. They fell back, the way grease runs off a hot pan quick, then quicker, dragging 2 wounded, leaving 3. We fired until the last of them slipped into the pine shade and the dark closed its teeth. Silence didn't mean safety. It meant the next part. "Ammo forward! Check your sights, check your hands, breathe," Miller said, stepping over to tap each hole with his glove like he was waking us up for breakfast. "You did fine. Keep your heads." Quote. The village began to talk again, windows creaked. A baby cried and was hushed. A door latch clicked twice, then a new noise grew above it all, an engine coughing itself awake. "Jeep," O'Connor said. "Please be ours." It was. It came slewing down the road with its lights hooded, radio mast flexing. The operator hunched over his set like a crow. The lieutenant hopped out before the wheels stopped and trotted to Miller, map already open, the wind trying to steal it from his hands. "Reports from north and south," he said, and his voice had that tight, brittle sanity men get when they've gone without sleep long enough to start paying interest. "They're hitting all along the line. Division thinks it's a full push." Miller didn't look surprised. "We hold?" "We hold." He nodded once. "Then we thicken the left." They felt for it. "Do it? Medical?" the lieutenant asked. And then he saw the hole where the boy had been and stopped asking. We worked with the dumb obedience of men who know busyness is the only antidote to fear. Wire went up in a second row, shin high and cruel. We broke ice off spare sandbags and stacked them into a rude breastwork. The tanks in the square 2 Shermans with winter tar brushed on in streaks like a tiger's growled up to our line and set their guns to watch the drainage cut. A crewman passed me a tin of coffee so strong it felt illegal. I gulped, burned my tongue, didn't care. After, I stood a while under the church eaves to get out of the wind. The bell hung mouth open above, black with smoke, rim scarred by a shard that had taken a bite out of December. My breath lifted in long ghosts, one after the other. For a moment, I wasn't a soldier. I was a kid in Pennsylvania watching my father knock ice from the eaves with a broom handle, the dog barking at each falling chunk as if winter were an intruder that could be chased from the yard. A crack of rifle fire dragged me back. Not ours. Far right, probing. A flare followed hiss. Bloom and the world turned to theater light again, every shadow sharpened into a blade. In that hard white, the pines looked like cathedral columns, and the drifting snow like incense. "They're dressing the line," Miller called. "Positions!" We slid into our holes like hands into pockets. My cheeks were numb. A bead of melted frost ran from my temple into my collar, traced my spine like a cold finger. Johnson tucked his scarf higher. He had a ribbon of raw skin at his mouth from the chapping. Every time he swallowed, his Adam's apple knocked the wool. He whispered, "You ever think you'll forget this cold?" "No," I said, "but I hope it forgets me." He huffed a laugh that wasn't one. "My sister says when you stand near the train tracks back home in August, the heat floats. You can see it. Looks like the world is breathing." His eyes stayed on the tree line. "I'd like to see that again." Quote, "You will," I said, "because that was the line we all said, and sometimes if you said it gentle enough, it sounded less like a lie." The second assault announced itself with a distant drum roll of engines beneath the mortars, a low, layered growl that felt through the ribs more than heard. Not tanks, not yet trucks maybe, half-tracks something carrying men toward us with bad intentions. The mortars started neat and ended messy, overshooting, undershooting, coughing the village lane into a filthy soup. A door sailed past like a stiff brown wave. The first half-track nosed out of the pines and shuddered when a Sherman found it. The blast punched the night flat. When sound returned, it brought screaming. The Germans came in the blast's wake. They moved smarter this time, echelons, staggered, their machine guns set quick behind a wind-thrown log and stitching our parapet into frayed cloth. I hugged the low lip of snow and shot at elbows, at thighs, at anything that broke the white. The man I hit spun and sat hard like someone had tugged his chair away. To our left, the wire failed. Men poured through the gap and met the foxholes with their mouths open, shout, and steam. Grenades bounded like metal rabbits. One dropped into a hole and jumped back out a boot, had found it, then blew on the lip, showering all of us with gentle, deadly grit. I felt the sting in my cheek and thought absurdly of summer sand. "Left team push!" Miller roared, and he was already moving, carbine choosing, shoulders low, the big man small in that roar. The bar down there coughed an argument the Germans respected. They folded back a pace, then another, angering the snow with their boots. Time stopped being time. It became tasks. Aim here, breathe there, thumb the clip, speak your friend's name, tug a sleeve, put your head down and wait for the next whistle. The night swelled and shrank with each flare, the world a throbbing pupil. When the line finally steadied, I realized my hands weren't shaking anymore. They were too tired to. We held. The half-tracks backed into the trees. The machine gun fell silent, either out of ammo or out of men. For a minute, the only sound was the small, shame-faced clink of brass cooling in the snow. Then the forest exhaled. "Water," Johnson said, and his voice sounded like it had been stored in a cellar. He passed me his canteen. It was half ice, half the memory of coffee. I drank and wanted to cry. Not from fear now, from relief, as sharp as sorrow. Miller stood over us, steam lifting from his shoulders like he'd wrestled the night and left it sweating. "Good work," he said simply. He wasn't the kind of man who wasted praise. "Set watches, rotate sleep. We'll take anything warm you can find. Blankets, doors, hell, curtains, if they aren't nailed." He looked at the tree line one more time, like a farmer judging a sky, then back at us. "They'll try again before dawn." He left. We did what he said. O'Connor scavenged a shutter off a blown-out cottage and laid it across our hole to break the wind. Johnson found a threadbare lace curtain and tucked it into his collar like a scarf. In the flare light, he looked ridiculous and holy. Sleep came in fox bites, quick nips, not meals. I dreamed of a summer porch. The dog's nails clicked across sun-hot boards. A radio murmured baseball, and my father argued with it kindly. When I woke, the world was snow and iron again, and the radio had become a distant, familiar whistle. "Incoming," O'Connor said softly, and we were already reaching for our helmets. The sky split, the ridge bucked, the long night kept going, and under it all, beneath the mortars, beneath the fear, the old stubborn fact of us remained. We were still here. Dawn came late and gray, as though the sun itself was reluctant to climb over the frozen hills. The ridge lay in a bruised silence. Smoke curled low over the shell holes, over the shattered fences, and the broken shutters flapping in the wind. The snow was churned into gray paste where boots, shells, and bodies had passed in the night. My hands shook as I checked my rifle. Not from cold this time, though the cold was still there, gnawing at fingers and toes, but from the long hours of waiting, firing, waiting again. Fatigue had settled into my bones like an unwelcome guest and refused to leave. Johnson leaned against the rim of the foxhole, eyes half shut. His helmet was dusted white, his scarf stiff with frost. When he breathed, it came out slow, like each exhale was something he had to think about first. "Sun's up," he said softly. "Yeah," I answered, though the sun was only a pale smear behind the clouds, a sickle of weak light cutting through the smoke. Traces of the night. The battlefield looked different in daylight. Under the flares, it had been black and white, all sharp edges and rushing shadows. Now it was colorless grays, browns, the red-brown patches already freezing dark in the snow. A helmet lay half-buried near the wire, its chin straps stiff with ice. A rifle leaned against a shattered fence post, bayonet snapped in half. I could see a boot sticking from a drift 30 yards out where nobody had reached yet. The Germans had pulled back before dawn, leaving their dead, the way we left ours sometimes when the fight moved too fast to gather everyone. The medics moved quietly now, sleds and stretchers whispering over the snow. They didn't talk unless they had to. Some of the new replacements boys just arrived yesterday stared too long at the bodies. O'Connor told them to cut it out, not unkindly. Just the voice of a man who'd learned you don't let your eyes linger if you want to sleep later. Orders in the cold. Miller came along the line with the lieutenant, both men hunched against the wind that never stopped moving through the trees. "Division says hold this ridge until further notice," the lieutenant told us. His face was the color of old paper, dark stubble climbing his jaw like moss on a rock. "We've got armor covering the southern approach. More ammo coming up the road as soon as it clears." I looked at the road. It was a mess of frozen ruts and wreckage. An old wagon split open where a shell had taken its horse the night before. Clearing it would take more than shovels. Miller read our faces like he always did. "We hold," he repeated simply, as though those two words built a wall higher than any fort. Nobody argued. A brief respite. For a while, there was nothing to do but wait again. The men scrounged for wood to burn. Somebody found a door half off its hinges and broke it into pieces for the little stoves we built from ration tins. The smoke smelled of pine pitch and old paint, but it was heat, and none of us cared. Johnson sat close enough to the flame that I thought he might set his scarf alight. He held his hands over it like a man begging a blessing. "Got a letter from home," he said finally, voice low. "Yeah?" O'Connor asked without looking up. "Yeah. My sister says the river's frozen solid back in town, kids skating on it every day after school." He fell quiet a moment, eyes far away. "I used to do that. Before the war. Before everything." O'Connor struck a match, cupping it against the wind as he lit another cigarette. "Better hold on to that picture," he said. "World like this, you need something warm in your head." Signs from the trees. It was near noon when the first shots cracked from the tree line. Not many, just 2, maybe 3. Testing shots, far off. Men froze along the ridge. Rifles turned toward the woods, barrels glinting dull under the winter Sunday. Another shot. A puff of snow where the round hit short of the line. "Scouts," Miller said beside me. His voice was calm, but his eyes stayed on the trees. "They're looking for our positions." We stayed low. Nobody fired back. The forest swallowed its own echoes, leaving only wind and the creak of branches under their ice. The armor arrives. Engines growled behind us a little after 1 o'clock. Shermans, 3 of them, snow crusted along their hulls, turrets swinging like watchful heads as they lumbered up the road toward the ridge. Men stepped aside to let them pass. One tanker leaned from his hatch long enough to toss down a crate of rations before the column clanked on, treads biting into frozen ruts with a sound like tearing cloth. Their presence felt heavier than the armor itself. A tank on your side was like a moving wall, a promise louder than any speech. Whispers of the next attack. The sky went darker toward afternoon. Clouds rolled in low and mean, the kind that turned daylight into something thin and sour. I caught Miller watching the horizon the way hunters watch tree lines. "They'll come again before nightfall," he said quietly to the lieutenant. I heard it because everyone close enough pretended not to. The lieutenant just nodded. "They want this ridge. They're not getting it. I can." Miller's voice carried no heat, only the certainty of a man who had already decided the matter in his bones. Build up before the storm. We stacked more ammo, shifted the machine guns to cover the left flank where they'd broken through last night. Men checked rifles with the slow care of farmers mending fences before a storm. The tanks spread along the slope, turrets facing outward now, engines idling in low, patient rumbles. I cleaned my rifle twice, though it didn't need it. Anything to keep my hands busy while the sky pressed lower. Johnson hummed under his breath the same blues tune he always reached for when fear got close enough to touch. "Cut that out," O'Connor told him. Johnson didn't stop. When the horizon lit up, the first shells came just as the sun tried to set behind the western hills. Orange light flashed through the trees, followed by the long, rolling thunder of guns miles away, but far too close. Men dropped into holes. Helmets came down. Someone shouted for the medics before the first round even landed, like he wanted them ready ahead of time. The ridge shook. Snow lifted in sheets where the impacts found their mark. A Sherman belched smoke as shrapnel hammered its side plates, though the crew inside waved it off like men shooing flies. The attack had begun again. The barrage didn't come all at once. It uncoiled, measured, deliberate, like a long steel cable, paying out from some dark winch beyond the hills. First, the slow whistles that make your back teeth ache, then the breathless beats before impact, then the ground itself turning to a mouth that bit and chewed. "Helmets down! Keep your faces in!" Miller's voice rode the air the way a heavy cart rides ruts steady because it has no other choice. Snow leapt in flat sheets where the first round struck short of the line. A fence went up like matchsticks. The schoolhouse door twisted off its hinges and skated across the lane in a spray of splinters. The stove we'd nursed all morning coughed sparks and died. Every new blast shoved the last one deeper into our skulls, until each second had a seam of silence running through it, thin as a hair. I tasted iron. Not blood-old rust, old rain off old rails. It sat at the back of the throat the way dread sits in a man's chest and refuses to move. Count. I told myself. But the numbers broke like twigs in fast water. When the barrage lifted, the sound that replaced it was worse. Men shouting across the white, boots drumming snow, the short, cruel chatter of submachine guns. A flare hissed up, bloomed, and hung trembling on its silk like a small winter moon. The world below turned hard and theatrical. Every shadow had edges. They came in 3 tongues that lapped our slope left, center, right never rushing, always moving, always finding the hollows where the shelling had scooped the earth. White smocks, dark steel helmets, faces the flare light made bone pale. "Hold," Miller said, close enough I could feel the word in my coat. "On my word now," the ridge answered. Rifles cracked in a rough volley. and then fell into their own rhythms, fast, slow, fist, open-hand men finding the cadence that kept fear from owning their aim. The .30 cals spoke like sawmills. A Sherman on our right sent a shell into the drainage cut. The blast rolled the snow over on itself as if the hill had turned under a blanket. They ducked, but they didn't stop. Wire sang low, ugly when cutters bit it. A grenade skipped the lip of our hole and fell back into its own footprints. The thump shoved me against Johnson, and he made a sound like a man bumping his knee on a kitchen table at home. Not pain surprise, annoyance that the world had forgotten its manners. "Left! Left!" O'Connor barked. The center line was holding, the left seethed. A machine gun there chopped too long and gagged. Its crew hauled the barrel off hot and screaming, fingers blistering through gloves. Miller sprinted, a door torn off a house, across his shoulders like a shield, and braced it for the next team, as if he'd been born in a lumberyard. The fight foamed. It couldn't decide whether to boil or to freeze. Time made small loops, a hand on my sleeve, a clip slapping my palm, a face near enough to count the flakes stuck in its lashes. Then the face was not there, and the flakes were on the snow. Breathe. I told Johnson. He was breathing. I needed to say it to someone. When the push bent back from the left, the right surged to replace it. They felt for seams like a blind man mapping a stranger's face. Our line creaked. It didn't break. The tanks worked a grim metronome. He into the tree line. Wait for the trunks to stop trembling. He again. Shards of pine combed the slope like thrown knives. A half-track shouldered out of the trees and froze as if it had stepped into a cold room uninvited. 2 shells found it one ugly, one kind, and it folded like a set of card tables and smoked. The flare died. Dark took its room back. For a few breaths, the only light came from the small, steady stars and the shame-faced flicker of things burning that shouldn't. "They'll dress the line and try again," the lieutenant said from somewhere beyond my shoulder. He didn't raise his voice. He wanted the sentence to arrive, not to strike. "Water," Johnson whispered. The canteen was a bell of ice. We broke the mouth with a knife and drank the melt like thieves. The second act started with mortars soft as footfalls, not the heavy timpani of the first barrage cat's paws, clever and mean. They walked the rear, found the aid post, and stitched the ground around it until the lantern inside hopped and swung and painted the chaplain's face in wild amber. He didn't duck. His hands were busy with a man who wouldn't see the lantern again. I looked down at my own hands. The web between thumb and finger was raw, where the stock had scoured it. Blood there didn't feel like blood. It felt like warm glue. "Do you remember August?" Johnson asked, voice small, as if he were ashamed of bringing summer into this place. "Corn tall as the porch roof," I said. "My father tipping water out of his hat after he mowed. My sister used to put lemon rinds in the water pitcher, said it made even the tap taste like the fair." He blinked hard. I can't tell if I want to laugh or throw up. "Either's allowed," O'Connor muttered. "Just don't do both in my hole." They came again at midnight, wider and lower with more muscle, as if they had decided to push the hill itself and see if it would roll. Our guns shortened their words. Grenades wrote quick little endings. The bar on our right rapped a sermon so severe even the wind paused to listen. A German flopped behind our shattered fence and began to shout. I didn't understand the words, but I knew the sound. Not Pain Fear's cousin, the one who shows up sober and early and insists on talking about practicalities. He had lost his map, or his nerve, or both. Another man crawled to him and pressed their helmets together like brothers over a secret. Then a flare said their names for our machine gun, and the secret didn't matter anymore. We held the ridge. The night sulked. Between pushes, silence stacked. In those stacks, the mind plays its games. I saw the river back home, January glass under a pale sun, boys skittering in leather shoes because skates were too dear. My mother stood at the kitchen window and pretended not to watch my falls. Steam shook itself off the kettle on the stove and never quite became a whistle. From the radio, a voice that knew how to pitch itself between the living room and the hayloft. Baseball in July, cigarettes in October. Victory soon, boys. A shell took the top off the church tower and left the bell hanging from nothing. For a second, it looked obscene, like a tongue held between teeth. Kid. O'Connor touched my arm. Here. He offered a cigarette. I didn't smoke. Tonight I did. The first pull set my lungs on fire. The second felt like the world loosening its knuckles. I coughed, laughed, coughed again. O'Connor's grin was all gums and grime. Welcome to Brooklyn, he said. Toward 3, the wind swung north. It drove the smoke low and the cold lower. Our breath fell at our feet like tossed rice. The Germans tried once more, short, savage, pure temper, and lost their will on the wire. A man screamed and then apologized to no one in particular. Another tried to stand in the flashes and be a statue. Statues don't bleed as fast as he did. The lieutenant crawled past, one glove off, pencil in his mouth, map under his chest, like a warm thing. 2 guns left of the draw, he said, and the words fogged and vanished. Tank, count 15 short of the lane. Save the he for the trunk's he, then MG. Don't burn your belts. Miller nodded and was gone. He had a gift for being where he was most needed, as if the ground told him, as if the ridge itself had a nerve that ran through his boots. Just before dawn, I knew the hour by the way the dark thinned at the far tree line, and the birds thought about it, and then decided, not yet. The sky cracked open with a sound that wasn't war at all. It was weather finding us. A sleet, thin as needles, flicking our faces. The flakes hissed on the tank hulls and died. The snow changed its mind, turned to a slush that swallowed casings and offered them back cooled and ashamed. Shift watches, Miller said. If you can't feel your hands, trade them for someone else's. I pried mine off the rifle like old labels, off old bottles. Johnson flexed his fingers and winced. He had drawn a blood smile across the knuckles without noticing. I wrapped it with the last clean strip of bandage we owned. It looked like holiness on a farm boy's fist. Thanks, he said. When this is over, it isn't, I said. And he nodded, not gloomy honest. The war had taught us to speak the sentence we were in, not the one we wanted. Dawn finally climbed the hill, gray as dishwater, and showed us what the night had made. The slope wore new seams. Trees lay down like tired men. The barn at the rear remembered itself as a frame and nothing else. Our faces had turned the same color as the sky. When I smiled by accident at some small, stupid thing, I felt the crack in my lip open like a door. The Germans were gone for now. Not far, just behind the nearest thought. We could feel their listening. Resupply, the lieutenant said, and the words sounded like a hymn. Ammunition came in stumbling men. Water came in hunks you had to argue with your teeth. Somebody found apples in a buried cellar, soft and brown at the core, and we ate them like saints touching relics. The chaplain moved along the line with a pocket Bible so swollen from damp it looked ready to hatch. He didn't sermon. He asked surnames, said them back correct, and put a hand on a shoulder, as if he were measuring the weight we carried and adding 1 pound of his own. Where the ground had taken men, he stood, lips moving, and the wind lifted the words and put them down somewhere we couldn't see. Mail, a runner said, surprised to have it. 2 letters found me. One from my mother, fabric scraps rubbed with cinnamon, a recipe in her round hand, as if smell alone could argue with winter. One from a girl who danced with me twice and never promised a third. She told me the grocery had put in electric doors that whooshed like ocean. I read both until the paper warmed, then folded them small and tucked them where the cold couldn't reach. By noon, orders. Hold the ridge, the lieutenant said, and everybody smiled without humor. Command says there's a gap south. We're the hinge. If we fold. He didn't finish. Hinges aren't allowed to have imaginations. Understood, Miller said, and the word had the weight of a beam. We thickened the center and bribed the left with every trick we knew trip flares. A scythe of wire, 2 foxholes married into one mean nest. The Shermans spread like fingers about to catch a falling plate. The men ate and cleaned and spoke softly of small, irrelevant things, which radio voices sounded like good luck, whether coffee could be too strong to be moral, how the sleet made the snow smell like the river thawing in March. Far off, the big guns muttered. Closer, a bird remembered its name and said it once, just to see if the sky would answer. The sky didn't, but we were still here. We would be here through the next bell and the next, through the sleet and the smoke and the short, bright lives of flares, through the old songs hummed under scarves and the new scars taped with somebody's last clean rag, through the long, civilized cruelty of artillery and the close, impolite work of men at 10 paces. We would be here because the hinge held, because Miller's voice knew how to nail fear to its own post, because O'Connor's laugh cut winter in half for a second at a time, because Johnson's humming kept a small door open in a world that wanted all doors shut. The ridge breathed with us, and when the next storm of steel rolled up the slope, we breathed again together, on one count, and answered. The 5th night began the way all the others had, with wind along the tree line, cold creeping into the bones, and that low, patient waiting before the first shells fell. But this time, something in the air felt different. Even the sky seemed to know. It hung low and heavy above us, a slate lid pressed over the ridge, turning the last light into something thin and metallic. I stood in my foxhole, watching it drain out of the world, until the snow and the smoke were the same color, and you couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. Johnson leaned against the rim beside me, scarf pulled so high only his eyes showed. They looked older than they had that morning. "They'll come tonight," he said quietly. "They always do," I answered. But we both knew this time would be worse. The first shells. They landed just after dark. Not the probing, lazy mortar fire of the nights before. This was heavier, closer, the kind that found your lungs as well as your ears. The first hit the far end of the ridge, the second behind the barn that wasn't really a barn anymore, just 3 walls holding up a prayer. Then the rest came in a long, rolling drumbeat that shook the snow off the trees and sent it spinning through the air in glittering sheets. "Keep your heads down," Miller shouted, moving along the line with his shoulders bent low. "This is just the warm-up." Somehow, he always sounded calm, like he'd already measured the night and found it survivable. The shells walked closer, tearing the road, the fence posts, the shallow ditches where men hugged themselves against the earth. One round took the roof off the house near the crossroads, sending it up in a single, sighing lift of beams and shingles before it came down in pieces like broken bread. When the barrage stopped, the quiet was worse than the noise. You could feel every man along the line waiting for what came next. The first wave, they came out of the smoke with the precision of men who had done this before. White smocks, low helmets, rifles across their chests. They moved in short, careful rushes, using every fold of ground, every shell hole we had given them the night before. "Hold," Miller said softly, crouched near the center line. The tanks were quiet behind us, their turrets swinging like heads watching a slow parade. "Hold." The first squad reached the wire. "Now!" The ridge cracked open. Rifles, machine guns, the deep slamming voices of the Shermans, all of it rolled out at once, a wall of sound and fire and tearing snow. Men dropped at the wire. Others threw themselves flat in the craters, shouting to each other under the fire that tore the night into strips. One made it through a gap on the left, then another. I swung my rifle toward the movement and fired until the bolt locked open and my hands moved on their own. Loading, firing, loading again. Close work. They hit the left flank hardest. Grenades tumbled into foxholes. Men scrambled, cursing, shoving them back before they blew in the wire with dull, heavy thumps that sprayed the snow black. Miller was everywhere at once, one moment on the right, shouting for more ammo, the next dragging a machine gun crew forward to seal a gap on the left where the snow boiled with movement. Johnson fired beside me, the barrel of his rifle steaming in the cold. His scarf had fallen, and his mouth was a hard, thin line. O'Connor worked the bar like a man hammering a nail through a door he didn't want opened. Short bursts, never wasting rounds, the snow leaping under his fire. The first wave broke after 20 minutes. Bodies lay tangled in the wire. Smoke drifted through the trees where our shells had found their mark. Men reloaded in silence, eyes on the dark beyond the tree line. We all knew it wasn't over. The second wave. It came with more artillery. Shells hammered the ridge, the road, the shallow ditches, until the air was a living thing that slapped and bit and roared in our faces. Then the machine guns from the tree line opened up, long punishing bursts that tore the ground around us into jumping fountains of snow and dirt. Figures moved behind the fire, spreading wide along the slope. "Here they come," someone shouted. They hit the center this time. Our rifles cracked until the barrels smoked. The Shermans slammed shell after shell into the tree line, blasting trees into splinters, turning snow to vapor. Still they came. They reached the wire in 3 places at once. Men fought at 10 yards, 5, less. Grenades, bayonets, rifles fired, so close the muzzle blasts threw snow in each other's faces. I saw Miller club a man down with the stock of his carbine when his rounds ran out. Saw Johnson drag a wounded kid back by his collar while firing one-handed into the smoke. The second wave broke slower than the first, falling back in pieces, some crawling, some not moving at all. The long night. There was no rest after that. Artillery came again and again, sometimes for minutes, sometimes for half an hour, as though the gunners beyond the hills were taking turns breathing. Each barrage ended with another push, more men through the smoke, more wire torn, more ground churned into black slush under our boots. We held. By midnight, the ridge was a skeleton of itself. Trees snapped in half. Houses burned low behind the lines, sending up thin, steady flames that made the snow glow an ugly orange. Men moved like shadows among the wreckage, hauling ammo, bandaging wounds, dragging the dead into rows. Near the crossroads where the chaplain stood with his book open to pages the wind kept trying to turn. Before dawn. The last attack came near 3 in the morning. They threw everything they had at the center and left flank, mortars pounding the rear areas while machine guns scoured the forward line. For a while, it felt like the whole ridge might buckle under the weight. Then the Shermans found their range. Shells slammed into the tree line one after another, breaking the assault apart in great, heaving chunks of earth and smoke and splintered wood. When the fire lifted, nothing moved below but the wind. The ridge held. Somehow, the silence after dawn crept slow over the battlefield. The snow was red in places now, black in others where the shells had scorched it. The air smelled of powder and pine sap and the strange, sweet edge of burned wood. Men slumped in their foxholes, faces gray, eyes hollow from the long night. Miller moved along the line, speaking low, checking the wounded, counting the living. Johnson sat beside me, helmet in his lap, staring at nothing. "We're still here," he said finally. "Yeah," I answered. But it didn't feel like winning. Morning did not arrive so much as it leaked into the world thin, gray, reluctant. Frost glazed the lip of the foxhole like sugar that wouldn't melt. The ridge steamed in patches where shells had turned the snow to black slush and then to glass again. Smoke hung at knee height, a tired veil that made every step taste of cinders. Johnson's helmet sat crooked on his head. He had the look men got after long nights, cheeks chalk pale, eyes rimmed raw, a day older than yesterday and a year older than that. He turned the tin cup between his hands, listening to the ice inside rattle like teeth. "We kept it," he said, and his voice made no more claim than a weather report. "Yeah." The word felt like a stone I'd been holding on my tongue since midnight. Down the line, the burial detail moved quiet and slow. Boots crunched softly. A sled hissed. The chaplain's book looked swollen with damp. He held it near his chest like a bird too cold to fly. He didn't preach, just said names in a steady, low rhythm that matched the sawed-off prayer of the wind. O'Connor was gone to the aid post shrapnel, and a laugh. "Tell Brooklyn I'll be late." He left his bar with us, the barrel blued by the long night, the sling salted white where his hand had gripped it through frost. Miller came along the trench line with the lieutenant in tow. The sergeant's coat was hoard with frozen breath. Ice furred the seams like gray moss. He crouched, tapped our parapet with two knuckles, and the sound small, wooden, felt like a promise kept. "Resupply in an hour," he said. "Ammo. Water if they can bully the road. Kitchen's a rumor, don't bet your soul. We rotate rest by twos, 20 minutes horizontal if you can find it, then back up. Eyes open, ears open. Krauts don't always wait for decent weather." I quote. The lieutenant unrolled a map that had gone limp with damp. The edges flopped in the faint wind, a fish too tired to fight. "Command says hold through the afternoon," he said. "There's pressure south. We're the hinge." He looked like a man past, arguing with nouns. The hinge. It had been said aloud in the night. Hearing it at dawn gave it weight, like a beam set. For a time, the day was all small errands. We scrounged planks from the schoolhouse to shore the worst breaks in the trench. We knocked ice from the .30's feed tray with a bayonet and coaxed it to cycle with a splash of lamp oil. We used an empty shell crate as a step in the muddy place where the wall kept caving. The little labors made our hands useful and our heads quiet. I went to the well at the crossroads with 2 canteens and came back with 1 full, 1 half, and a memory I didn't ask for. In the doorway of a house without windows, a woman stood holding a child whose eyes were as big as the buttons on his coat. She watched me pass the way a deer watches a creek in winter, thirsty, wary, knowing the ice breaks. "Madam," I said, and my French was 2 words and a guess. I tipped the canteen. She shook her head. "Pour vous," she said softly, and then looked past me at the ridge like she was talking to it. "Pour rester, to stay." I walked away and didn't drink for 50 steps, then drank too much and coughed like a fool until the water came out my nose and froze on my lip. Johnson laughed once, 1 crack in a long sheet of ice, and clapped my shoulder. "You're a picture," he said. "Frame me," I told him. "Hang me above the stove." Mail found us around 10 wet envelopes stuck in a string bag the runner hauled under his coat. 1 for me, Mom's handwriting round and brave. She wrote of bread that rose too fast and split, of the grocer's new glass door that hissed like ocean, of a neighbor boy who'd built a sled with iron runners and couldn't keep it from biting the road. She didn't write of war. I read it twice, then again with the letter held to my face, and thought I could smell cinnamon where her hand had rested. Johnson had no letter. He asked if he could hear mine. He liked the part about the door. "Whoosh," he said, and made the sound under his breath like a child in the back seat watching fields go by. "After," he said, "when I get back, I'm gonna stand in that doorway and let it whoosh at me until they throw me out." "Make them throw you out twice," I said. By noon, the sky pressed closer, color of pewter left out in rain. Faint pops came from the far trees, the kind of half sounds that could be ice settling or rifles doing the same. The tanks idled like big patient animals resigned to the yoke. A repair crew banged a bent fender straight with a maul. Each blow a dull church bell nobody answered. Miller sent patrol 2 teams, 4 men each down the slope to touch the nearest shadows and name them. He tapped me on the shoulder. "You're on the right-hand feeler," he said. "Watch the drainage cut. It looks friendly." "Friendly?" Johnson echoed. "Like a pickpocket." Quote, "We went with Hart and Soto Hart. long and gawky as a gate, Soto round in the face, a barbershop kid who could fold a bandage like a handkerchief. We slid out through the 2 strands of wire we'd taught to part for us, and let the slope take our boots slow. The world narrowed to the width of my breath. The smoke at knee height stung the eyes and hid the small lies. A twig too straight, a drift that rose against the wind. At the broken fence where the ground falls toward the cut, Hart raised a hand. We froze. He touched a footprint with the muzzle of his rifle, and I could see where the ice had glazed it after the step old, maybe hours. He pointed. 3 more, staggered, the heel hard and flat. Heavy boots. Not ours. We followed to the lip of the drainage. Water hissed under a skin of ice. The sound had the intimacy of a man washing his hands in another room. Soto eased forward, lay flat, and slid his eyes over the bank. He lay so still the frost on his sleeve didn't crack. He came back with his face working. "Tripwire on the far root," he whispered. 2. He drew the little picture on his glove, a root like a gnarled finger. The wire looped and sunk beneath fresh powder. Neat work. We backed the way we'd come, set a marker for our own nightmen, a rag on a bayonet, laid low where only a man looking for it would see, and climbed into our own ruin as if it were home. "Clever folks," Miller said when we told him. He tapped the map. "They're shaping the ground. We won't oblige them. Put a fire sack there and there." He indicated angles no straight eye could see, lines of open snow that would cross like threads. If they come through the cut, we make them wish they loved a different creek. The afternoon sagged. It had the feel of a stage between acts props reset, actors changed, the hush that says the next part won't be gentle. We ate hot something from a can that used to say stew, and now said only heat. The taste wrapped itself around hunger like a blanket around a stone. O'Connor came back near 3, bandage fresh and grin stale. "You ladies miss me?" he said. His voice had a tin edge. The medics had given him half a field's worth of pills and not enough rest to use them. "They'll hit before dark," he added, "more to the air than to us." He stroked the bar like a dog that had understood a difficult trick. "I'll be ready." The sky agreed by growing heavier. The wind smoothed. A crow crossed the field alone and couldn't find a tree to like. It turned back and vanished into whatever hole crows keep for bad weather. "Stand to," Miller called as the light thinned from gray to the bruised color a forearm gets after rope. "Check your dogs. Load for bear." We checked. We loaded. We looked at one another in the way men do when they suspect their faces may not be the same shape by morning. "Hey," Johnson said. "After, I'll show you the train tracks in August. Heat floats there. Looks like the world is breathing." "Deal," I said. "You bring the lemon rinds." He smiled quick, crooked, a flame inside frost. "I'll bring 2. The first shells were already in the air. You can tell by the way the world hushes itself, as if it wants to hear its own bones sing. "Helmets?" O'Connor said softly. "Heads in." We obeyed. The ridge braced. The day went out like a candle between 2 fingers. And as the blast lifted the snow in blunt, dirty wings, as the old familiar whistle stitched the sky to our nerves, as the tanks wound up their patient hearts, I felt something new under the fear, not courage exactly, not pride, constancy. A stubborn, small animal in the chest that refuses to leave its burrow though the field is on fire. We were the hinge. Hinges don't run, hinges hold. "On my word," Miller said, calm as Sunday. We waited for his word. The sky never truly darkened that evening. It just thickened until the horizon itself felt close enough to touch. Clouds crouched over the ridge, heavy as wet wool, turning the light into something dim and sour. Snow began again slow, lazy flakes at first, then sharper, needling in on a slant with the wind behind it. The first shells didn't wait for full dark. They came in early, as if to remind us there would be no evening reprieve, no chance for the cold to settle before the noise returned. The ground trembled in long, steady shudders. Smoke and frozen dirt leapt from the impact craters, spinning skyward before falling back in ugly showers. Somewhere behind the line, a man cursed steadily, softly, as though prayer and profanity were close cousins. "Hold your places," Miller called, moving along the ridge with his shoulders squared like a beam holding up the whole hill. "This is their temper tantrum. The real push comes after." The first rush. It came with the wind. Figures pushed through the smoke in staggered groups, white smocks ghost pale against the churned black snow. The flare that went up above them turned the world harsh and theatrical again, every tree a frozen actor, every shadow a blade. "Wait," Miller said softly. They crossed the first row of craters. The tanks behind us rumbled, turrets turning with slow, patient menace. "Now!" The ridge spat fire. Rifles cracked in brutal harmony. Machine guns hammered the air into shreds. The Shermans roared, each shell a slam door no one could open again. Men went down in jerks and twists. Others crawled into the wreckage and kept coming, bayonets glinting like wet teeth. One reached the wire near Johnson's hole. He fired twice, quick and tight, and the figure folded without drama. The push faltered, then broke, the survivors melting back into the tree line with the wind at their heels. Lull between storms. For 10 minutes, nothing moved. The ridge smoked. Snow sifted down, trying in vain to hide the torn earth, the still shapes tangled in the wire. I checked my rifle. Johnson reloaded beside me, hands steady now out of habit more than calm. O'Connor lit a cigarette with a splinter of match and said nothing, his face orange in the brief flare before the wind killed it. The silence felt wrong, like the air before lightning. The second assault, it came heavier. Mortars walked along the ridge, pounding the forward line until every man hugged the frozen earth as if trying to push himself inside it. Then the infantry again, more this time, moving in long skirmish lines across the slope, rifles barking under the wind. They hit left flank first. I heard shouting over there, the ugly ripping noise of grenades, the saw blade chatter of the bar O'Connor had loaned the new crew. Miller sprinted past us toward the worst of it, carbine in one hand, the other waving men forward to plug the gap. The tanks joined in, shells smashing the tree line, knocking trees down in clouds of splinters and frozen needles. We fired until the barrels steamed, until the air stank of cordite and pine sap, and sweat trapped under wool coats. The second assault lasted longer than the first. When it broke, it left pieces behind of men, of trees, of the night itself. The wind shifts. By midnight, the weather turned meaner. Snow came sidewise now, a solid white curtain tearing across the ridge. Visibility shrank to the distance of a shout, then a whisper, then nothing but the shadow of the man in the next hole. We fired at movement, at muzzle flashes, at shapes that might have been men or branches or both. The wind carried voices German, English, screams, commands, but stripped them of direction until the whole battlefield sounded like one long, angry argument no one could win. Close work again. A squad slipped through the wire near the center, sudden as a knife in the dark. They hit a machine gun nest first. Shouts, shots, the flat white glare of a flare overhead, showing men wrestling in the snow like figures carved from ice. We turned rifles inward, firing into our own lines where the enemy had poured through. The BAR crew swung their weapon like a door on its hinge, cutting the gap off with a sheet of bullets. When it was over, 4 Germans lay among the gun crew, all of them still as the snow that began to cover them at once. After midnight, the assaults thinned after 1 o'clock. Artillery still came lazy now, the odd shell landing without pattern like a drunk knocking on doors, but the big pushes stopped. Men slumped in their holes, heads bent, rifles across their laps. Some ate cold rations with stiff fingers, others just stared at the tree line as if daring it to move again. Miller made his rounds like always, voice low, steady, promising nothing but the fact of itself. "Hold till daylight," he said. "Then we'll see what's left of them." Dawn again. The sky paled slowly, grudgingly, turning the snow blue, then white, then the color of old paper as the sun tried to climb above the clouds. Scouts went out, came back, shaking their heads. The enemy had pulled back into the woods, leaving the ridge to us and the wind. Johnson leaned against the parapet, scarf stiff with frozen breath. "They'll be back," he said flatly. "Yeah," I told him, "but not today." Morning came slow and colorless, the kind of light that made no promises. Snow covered the bodies, the shell holes, the splintered trees, smoothing everything into the same blank shape. If you squinted, you could almost believe the night hadn't happened, that the ridge had always been this quiet, this still. But the men knew better. We moved along the line with the tired obedience of men who had survived too much in too little time. Helmets low, boots dragging, eyes refusing to look too long at anything the snow was already hiding. Johnson leaned against a shattered fence post, scarf stiff with frost, hands wrapped around a canteen he hadn't opened yet. His breath came out in long, even clouds, like he was afraid of wasting it. "They pulled back again," he said flatly. "Yeah." My voice felt older than it had yesterday, but we both knew they'd return. They always did. Counting the living, Miller made his rounds in silence. He carried a clipboard now where he'd found it. Nobody knew, and wrote down names, like a man adding up debts. When he reached each hole, he looked inside, nodded once, then moved on without a word. No speeches, no promises, just the count. The chaplain followed behind, coat flapping in the wind, book held tight against his chest. He stopped where the snow rose in suspicious mounds and said quiet things nobody argued with. By mid-morning, the ridge felt thinner. Not the line itself, the men were still there, rifles across their knees, but something underneath, something you couldn't put sandbags on. Small mercies. The supply sleds came at noon. They creaked up the road behind two mules, whose ribs showed through their winter coats, dragging ammo boxes, water cans, a crate of something that steamed faintly through the slats. Coffee. Real coffee, hot and black, ladled into tin cups dented from 3 wars ago. We drank it like medicine, not caring that it tasted faintly of the firewood they'd boiled it over. O'Connor held his cup with both hands, eyes half closed, the steam painting his face in pale ghosts. "Better than Brooklyn," he muttered. Johnson smiled once, small and crooked. "Don't let the Navy hear you say that." For 5 whole minutes, nobody spoke above a murmur. The guns were quiet. The sky held its snow. The ridge pretended to be a place where men could rest. Letters and lemon rinds. Mail came with the coffee half, a sack thrown from a jeep that didn't linger longer than it had to. I got one letter, my mother again. She wrote about a jar of peaches she'd found in the cellar, the last from summer, how she and my sister had eaten them straight from the glass with 2 spoons, laughing when the syrup dripped. She wrote about the neighbor boy who'd broken his arm falling off the sled he'd bragged about in the last letter, about how the church roof finally caved under the snow and nobody seemed surprised. At the end, one line: "Stay warm, stay safe. We pray every night." I folded it slow and put it in the inside pocket of my coat, close against the place where the cold hadn't reached yet. Johnson didn't get a letter. He asked to hear mine again, so I read it out loud, my voice catching on the part about the peaches. 2 spoons, he said softly afterward, like the words themselves were something worth keeping. Work to be done. Miller didn't let the line stay idle long. "Fill the craters near the center," he ordered. "Double the wire left and right. Move the machine guns back 5 yards, let the next push waste itself before it reaches us." Men moved with the weary precision of habit, boots crunching, shovels biting into snow packed hard as concrete. The tanks repositioned too, turrets swinging east toward the tree line like watchful heads. Their engines rumbled low, exhaust steaming into the gray air in long, patient breaths. We worked because it kept our hands busy, and busy hands kept thoughts from going places they shouldn't. The afternoon patrol. 2 squads went down the slope after lunch, rifles low, eyes on the dark edges of the woods. I went with the second team, Johnson at my shoulder. The snow lay smooth in the open ground below, hiding whatever waited underneath. The trees beyond stood silent, branches heavy with old frost. We found the places where the Germans had pulled back footprints frozen in half-melted drifts, shell casings under a shattered log, a torn bit of white cloth caught on the wire like a surrender flag too small to matter. At the far edge of the clearing, we saw the tripwires. 3 of them, stretched low across a narrow path, the mines buried neat beneath shallow snow. "Careful work," Johnson murmured. We marked the spot for the engineers and fell back slow, eyes on the tree line the whole way, waiting again. The afternoon passed without shells. Men sat in their holes cleaning rifles that didn't need it, smoking the last of their rations, staring at the sky like it might tell them what came next. Miller stood near the road with the lieutenant. Both men bent over the map that had gone soft from too many wet hands. "They'll hit tonight," Miller said, loud enough for us to hear. Nobody argued. The sky before the storm. Near dusk, the wind dropped. Snow fell straight down now, soft and slow, the kind that looked peaceful if you didn't know better. The horizon glowed faintly where the sun tried to set behind the clouds, turning the sky the color of dirty brass. The ridge went quiet in that way. Battlefields do before they break apart again, rifles loaded, grenades stacked, men waiting with the stillness of pulled wire. Johnson hummed under his breath, that same low blues tune he always reached for when things felt close. Nobody told him to stop this time. Night falls. The first flares went up just after dark. White light swung over the snow, over the wire, over the foxholes where we waited with rifles tight against our shoulders. Somewhere beyond the tree line, engines rumbled to life. Miller moved along the line, voice steady, the same 3 words over and over. "Stand to, stand to, stand to." And the night didn't fall so much as it slammed shut. 1 minute, the ridge was dim gray under the last tired light. The next, it was a box with the lid closed, the air heavy with waiting. Snow came harder, wind pushing it sideways so that the world narrowed to the distance of a single breath. Men shifted in their holes, rifles across their knees, faces tilted to hear through the dark. The first shells arrived, like the clearing of a throat. 1, 2, then a long punishing roll that found the road, the fence line, the barn skeleton, the empty schoolhouse already cracked from nights before. The ridge shook, smoke boiled up, caught the wind, tore into pieces that fell across our positions in bitter flakes. "Hold tight," Miller shouted above the blasts. "This is the cover fire. Infantry's next." When the darkness moved, they came behind the shell fire the way water comes through a broken dam. White smocks bent low, rifles slung, machine guns cradled like infants. They moved in 3 wedges across the slope, using the shell craters for cover, slipping through gaps in the wire they'd memorized from nights before. Flares popped overhead, swinging light across the snow in hard white sweeps. Every shadow grew teeth. "Hold." Miller raised his arm, eyes tracking the lead squad. They hit the first marker we'd driven into the snow at 20 yards. "Now!" The ridge roared, rifles cracked in ragged volleys. Machine guns stitched red tracers through the smoke. The Shermans behind us bellowed, shells hammering the tree line until whole trees jumped out of the ground in splinters. Men fell and kept coming. Others crawled forward, grenades in hand, rifles snapping at our muzzle flashes. One reached the lip of Johnson's foxhole. Johnson shot him point blank, shoved the body back over the edge, reloaded without looking up. The center buckles. They hit the center line hardest. Mortars dropped behind us to cut off the road, shells falling among the ammo sleds and aid posts until the rear was chaos of its own. Miller ran through it all, voice cutting across the gunfire like a whip. Shift left, cover the gap, tank 2, traverse right, hold their fire. The Sherman's main gun answered, with a blast that left my ears ringing even through the helmet. The round found the drainage cut, the one place we hadn't filled with mines. Snow, wood, and bodies lifted together, then rained down in a mess that steamed in the cold. Still they came. I fired until the rifle's barrel smoked against my sleeve. Beside me, O'Connor worked the bar in short, savage bursts, each one dropping another man into the wire. The center line bent, then held. Close quarters work. Some got through. One squad reached the second row of wire near the machine gun nest and threw grenades before we cut them down. Another crawled within 10 yards of the left flank, trading rifle fire with men who could see their faces in the flare light. The fight shrank to shouting distance. I saw Miller pistol a man in the mud near the aid post, saw Soto the barber's kid drag a wounded German back behind our lines so the medics could work on him too. Saw Johnson, scarf gone, teeth bared, firing his rifle like the world depended on each shot landing where he wanted it. Maybe it did. The storm breaks. By midnight, the whole ridge was one long bruise of noise and smoke. Shells tore the ground into shuddering heaps. Snow hissed as it fell on hot metal. Men shouted in English, German, prayer book Latin, the words all the same shape under artillery thunder. The third wave hit just after 1 o'clock. Heavier. Half-tracks nosed out of the tree line. Machine guns already hammering. Headlights hooded to slits that glowed like the eyes of hunting animals. The Shermans opened up before the infantry reached the wire. One half-track blew apart in a long sheet of flame. Another backed into the trees, smoking like a chimney kicked over in a storm. But the men behind them didn't stop. They came through the gaps in the smoke, shouting, firing, throwing grenades into the foxholes nearest the center line. We met them at 10 yards. 5. The ridge dissolved into 100 small fights, men wrestling in the snow, rifles cracking muzzle to muzzle, bayonets flashing white under the flare light. Holding the line, I don't remember how long it lasted. Time shrank to reloading, firing, throwing, ducking, to Miller's voice somewhere down the line, steady as a metronome. Hold here, shift there, keep the left anchored, watch the center, center holding, holding, holding. By 2 a.m., the third wave fell back, leaving the slope littered with bodies tangled in wire and shell craters. The wind returned. The snow fell thicker, trying to cover everything at once. Men slumped in their holes, faces hollow, rifles empty, hands shaking too hard to load new clips until someone shouted at them to move. The last push. It came near 3. The heaviest shelling yet, rolling up the ridge from one end to the other, tearing the road, the fence line, the empty schoolhouse, the barn skeleton again for good measure. Then the final wave. More men than I'd seen in one place since this started, shouting as they came on in the dark. The Shermans fired until the barrels glowed. The machine guns raked the wire until nothing moved near it. One half-track made it halfway up the slope before a bazooka crew hit it from the left. The blast rolled it onto its side, track spinning like a beetle's legs before it caught fire. The men behind it tried once more for the gap near the center line. We threw everything we had at them. Rifles, grenades. The last belts from the 30 seconds. When the smoke cleared, nothing moved below the wire except the wind. Silence again. Dawn crept over the ridge like it was afraid of what it might see. The snow had covered some of it already, not enough. Medics moved among the holes, checking the living, dragging the wounded back toward the aid post. Miller walked the line with the same clipboard, writing names, nodding at the men who nodded back. We held. Johnson said beside me, voice thin. Yeah, I told him, but it didn't feel like victory, only survival. Dawn didn't so much arrive as bleed slowly into the sky. The snow-covered ridge lay quiet under a thin gray light, the kind that didn't care what it revealed. The storm had passed. The guns had stopped. Even the wind seemed to have lost interest in us. We stood there a long time, rifles hanging from our shoulders, watching the world come back in pieces, the line of trees along the ridge, the roofless barn, the ragged wire cutting across the slope like the signature of something cruel and patient. Nobody spoke, not at first. It wasn't silence the way cities mean it or homes mean it. This was the quiet of a battlefield that had burned itself empty, a place holding its breath while it waited to see who would move first, counting what's left. Miller came down the line with his clipboard, coat stiff with frozen mud, boots creaking in the hard snow. He looked older than yesterday. We all did. He paused at each hole, asked the same question. All here? Men nodded, or didn't. The chaplain followed behind, lips moving, voice low, naming the ones who wouldn't answer. The wind tried to steal the words, but some of them stayed. Johnson leaned on his rifle beside me, scarf torn, eyes hollow. Feels like the whole world's holding its breath, he said softly. Yeah, I told him. Neither of us looked toward the rows near the barn where the medics had lined the bodies, the snow already covering them in soft, white sheets. The village wakes. By mid-morning, the civilians crept back out thin, pale faces from the cellars and the half-broken doorways. A woman with a child on her hip crossed herself when she saw the wrecked half-tracks on the slope. An old man carried firewood to the schoolhouse where the roof was gone. He stacked it neat against the wall like it mattered. Maybe it did. Life always tries to come back, even here. The kitchen truck finally made it through the wrecked road near noon. The men lined up with cups and mess tins, steam curling over their helmets. The coffee was strong enough to walk on its own. The stew mostly water with ideas of meat floating in it. Nobody cared. Mail call. A runner brought mail with the kitchen truck 2 sacks this time. The paper damp but legible. I got one letter, my mother again. She wrote about my father fixing the barn roof back home, about the first signs of thaw along the river, about how the church choir was practicing Easter hymns even though it was only January. At the end she wrote, "Stay safe, we pray for you every night." Johnson didn't get a letter. He asked to hear mine. He always did. I read it twice, voice rough. The words sounding strange out here among the wreckage. Orders again. The lieutenant arrived with a jeep and a map rolled under his arm. Division says hold till afternoon, he told Miller. Then we move east. They're falling back everywhere. We push. Push. The word felt heavy after nights spent holding on by the teeth. Miller just nodded. He didn't look at the map long. He didn't have to. Orders always come like that. Too late to argue, too soon to rest. Burying the ridge. The burial detail worked all afternoon. They dug where the ground would let them, used explosives where it wouldn't. The chaplain read from his book, breath smoking in the cold, the words falling into the open earth like seeds nobody expected to grow. We carried the bodies wrapped in blankets or coats or nothing at all. German, American. It didn't matter now. The snow fell soft and steady, covering the fresh-turned mounds before we finished the next one. The road east. We moved out at dusk. The column stretched along the frozen road, rifles slung, packs heavy, boots dragging through the ruts and the churned snow. The tanks led, engines growling, black smoke smearing the low sky behind them. Nobody talked much. The men walked with their heads down like they didn't want to see too far ahead or too far behind. The village fell away behind us, the half-broken houses, the shell-bitten church tower, the fields where the snow already smoothed everything flat. Looking back, I turned once before the road bent east. The ridge lay quiet under the falling snow. The wind erased our tracks almost as fast as we made them. It was hard to believe how much noise had lived there just a day ago. How much fire, how much fear. It looked empty now, like the war had already forgotten it. What remains? We marched until full dark, boots crunching in the frozen ruts, breath rising in pale ghosts. Men sang under their breath sometimes, low songs with no words, just something to keep the cold from climbing too far inside. Johnson walked beside me, eyes forward. "When this is done," he said, "I'm going to stand on the train tracks in August and watch the heat float." "Yeah," I told him. "Bring the lemon rinds." He smiled once in the dark. The ridge stayed behind us. The war stayed ahead. We carried our rifles, our packs, and the names of the men who wouldn't come along. The snow kept falling, soft as ash, covering the road, the fields, the fresh graves. Spring would come someday. The world would turn green again. But not yet.